Hello, my name is Grantley McCauley, Lead Architect for AB Suite. In this presentation, the AB Suite team will be helping me demonstrate the new features in AB Suite 8.0 System Modeler. These are the topics we will cover today, and we are going to show each of them by continuing our development of a Sudoku application we have been recently working on. Importing our Sudoku model brings us to our first enhancement, a completely refined wizard. While I continue my import, I would like to cross to Shirley to explain in detail the new import wizard. Over to you, Shirley.
Thanks, Grant. Now I'm going to talk about a new feature for import dialog. First, I'll show you the import dialog layout, and then I'll talk about the new added function on import dialog, refactor insertable global logics. Now let me show you the new dialog. Two pages are on this new dialog, Import Settings page and Advanced Settings page. The Import Settings page is divided into three parts. Import SQL Server and model name in destination part, and then select and add files in source part. After adding a file in source, the log path will appear in login part. Now let's move to the Advanced Setting page. What shows on Advanced Settings page is depending on the type of importing files. For importing model file, the settings are all related to model file. In conflict resolution, choose the option for element and language conflict. Choose configuration setting in include configuration part. And in additional options, it contains validation and exclude configuration checkbox. Some options are disabled in this scenario because the database is new created. For importing MDL file, Advanced Setting page looks like this. It contains script settings, LDL plus settings, and additional options. What's new in importing MDL file? A new option called Refactor Insertable Global Logics listed in Additional Options part. Check on this option. Refactor will be done during the import, just like using reeld utility to refactor LDL plus logic.
Thank you, Shirley. Now back to our Sudoku application. Here it is running in Debugger. Sudoku is one of the most popular puzzle games of all time. The goal of our application is to solve an incomplete 4x4 grid. First, we have to enter the numbers. And then press Solve It and let our Sudoku application work out what the missing numbers are. Well, that was pretty quick at doing the calculation, but there's got to be a better way of entering in those numbers. How about we drag a long text field onto our form for an alternate way of entering those numbers? So we'll open the painter and we'll drag a text field into our panel. This brings us to our next enhancement, the Add New Item dialog. I would like to ask Shelley to demonstrate how much faster it is creating not just one, but also multiple items using this dialog. Over to you, Shelley.
Thank you, Grant. This is Shelley. I'm going to talk about the improvements on creating new element. A new item dialog is introduced in 8.0, and several improvements are provided by this dialog in adding a new element. The improvements will be demonstrated in a simple model. The four main improvements are listed here. Let's have a look on them one by one. The first improvement is that the dialog provides the ability to set those properties before an element is created. Let's have a look on a simple model. Now I just invoke the new item dialog. You can expand the More option to check the properties that the selected item can be set. Please note that the properties shown in the More options will be different according to the element you selected in here. The name property is always there, but the other properties are changed accordingly. You can see. For example, you can create an aspect and set its presentation type, alias, version file, includes its name. When the name value is changed, for example, I just type. The alias and the version file will be changed automatically according to the new name. You can see the new aspect is created in the class view. Also, you can create a primitive with setting its length, primitive, and version file. By default, you can see the primitive will take its owner's version file name. Also, you can set a new version file for the primitive by just edit the text field, just like this. And click OK. The dialog will be closed. You can see the primitive will take its own version file. The second improvement is about creating multiple elements in an efficient way. For example, if you want to create 3 aspects and 2 reports under segment, you can achieve this by using the next button. Find the aspect here and click next, next, and next. You can see there will 3 aspects are created in the class view. Then you can change your selected item to report and click next and next. Now you will get report 1 and the report 2 is created. If you don't want to create any other elements, you can click cancel, close the dialog. The third improvement is that the dialog can be invoked in Painter and diagram with a restriction. Now I just open a Painter. As you know, only attribute is allowed to be added in Painter. So you can find that the dialog just provides attribute item when an attribute is required for a control, like text field. The dialog is there. You can set the template for the attribute when you're creating it. Then you can click OK. I can template to the primitive. Also, in the diagram, you will get almost the same behavior as Painter. just like I drag a primitive here. You can set the primitive's name, primitive type, length, and version file. Just click OK. One primitive is created in here. Okay, the last improvement is about the filter in the dialog. As you can see here, the list box shows all the elements that the document can be added. You can filter the items in the list box by click kinds, stereotypes, collections, and wizards. Also, all the items can be sorted by the name. The name can be sorted by ascending or descending. Okay, that's all for the new item dialog. Thank you for your time. We are looking forward to your experience feedback. Back to you, Grant.
Thank you, Shelley. That gave me time to complete the single input field for our numbers. Let's have a look at the design using a diagram. I'll add one to the model. And I'll drag our objects onto this diagram. So there's our iSpec. There was the primitive type that I created for our single line input. And what's this? Oh, this is the game board that's an array. And this brings us to our next feature in 8.0, is the ability to create arrays as a reusable type, making our attributes type safe. I would like to ask Zimbo to explain arrays for us in a little bit more detail. So over to you, Zimbo.
Thank you, Grant. Okay, about the new array types. If you may recall, in ABC 7.0, we can create an array instance by specifying attribute multiplicity property to represent a collection of cells. For example, here we have an instance of primitive 1, which is called attribute 1. Changing the multiplicity property to 4 will create a single dimensional array, which have a capacity of 4. Changing multiplicity property to 4, 4 will create a two-dimensional array, which have a capacity of 16. Changing multiplicity property to 4, 4, 4 will create a three-dimensional array, which have a capacity of 64. Now, if I want to create a parameter and a variable with identical definition as attribute 1 in my class 2, I'll need to create the elements and set the template and the multiplicity property. Everything looks simple enough. But what if later I found all these instances need to be updated to be a two-dimensional array with multiplicity 3, 4, and the member in the array should have the type of primitive 2. Here, it could be quite difficult for us to locate and update all these array instances one by one, especially in a large ABC project. That's why a reusable array type comes. In ABC 8.0, we can create an array type from the Add New Item dialog. It will create an array type with no instance. We can set the size property of an array type to specify the array dimensions, set a set template property to represent the item type in this array. Now, let's update all the instances we created to have the type of array1 instead of template to primitive 2. We will now just directly template to array1. You can see all the array instances now have the multiplicity recommend form and the primitive type number less 10. As you may notice, a valid template target is always required for an array type. Creating an array type with no template will report a model rule error. The valid template target for an array type includes primitive types and the serializable interface. Template to a class is not supported at the moment. Okay, that's all about the new array types. Back to you, Grant.
Thanks, Simbo. Great to hear I am using the right kind of array. The Sudoku application is looking really good. You caught me testing out the new single line input. Let me just complete entering in the numbers. Press enter. Oh, that's much easier to load the grid. Now let's solve it. Everything's working fine. I have been reading about quantum computing recently, and there is a QDK example of a Sudoku solver. What I would like to try now is sending my game board to this external processor. To do that in AB Suite, we just need to create an external class. So I'll drag a class onto our diagram. I'll call it Quantum Processor. And check the external property. I'll now add a method that will call out to this processor. And like I was saying before, we'll pass our game board as a parameter. So let's have a look at the different types I can send it as. VarString. Oh, that's new to AB Suite 8.0. Maybe this is the right one to use for sending out my game board. I know just the person to talk to. Russell, can you tell me a little bit about this new VarString?
Thanks, Grant. I'm going to talk about a new feature called VarString. Now, I'm not going to talk about this in the context of the Sudoku app, but rather in the context of a use case that involves sending large amounts of data to external libraries via parameters on methods. Now, VarString is a new primitive type specifically for parameters of external class methods. VarString represents a variable length string. Now, I'm sure you know that the standard string type in AB Suite is a fixed length string. You always include a length in the definition of a string. Well, a VarString does not have a defined length. Now, it turns out that this is very useful in the context of XML processing functionality of AB Suite. This is where XML messages can be submitted as transactions, and the transaction can respond with an XML message. It also involves the ability to call methods on external libraries and pass XML messages as parameters. Now I'm going to do a demonstration of a specific use case involving XML processing, and that is the logging of XML messages in an external library. Let's consider a use case where we have an AB Suite system that needs to process XML messages. These XML messages are sent in and out of our system into messenger classes. And let's say we want to log all of those XML messages by calling a method on an external library passing those XML messages as a string, and that library will log those messages to a file. So let's start by looking at our external library. Here it is here in the Solution Explorer. It's a C# library, has a C# source file here, and this is the implementation of the method that we're interested in, log XML. This receives a number of parameters, but the one we're interested in is this first string parameter called data, and this is expected to contain a complete XML message as a string. It opens a log file and it writes the contents of the data string to that log file. So let's now have a look at the definition of that external library in AB Suite. So let's look at the class view, and we can see we've got a folder here with some classes, and it's this one here that we're interested in, external caller. So this is the external class that represents our external library, and it has a number of methods. And here we can see the definition of the method we're interested in, log XML. So let's have a look at the definition of the first parameter here, data. So I select that and we look in the properties window, and here we have the primitive type VarString. Let's just look at the drop-down. So the drop-down contains all of the standard primitive types, Boolean, date, number, string, and it has this new one, VarString. Now this new primitive type of VarString will only appear for a parameter of an external class. Another aspect of this is it's only available for parameters that are defined with a direction of in. That is, it is only used when sending strings into an external class method. So let's have a look at how this external method log XML can be used. This system receives a lot of XML messages via messenger classes. We have a folder here with a list of messenger classes, and we're interested in this one, manage customer. It will receive an XML message representing a customer with data about that customer. It is stereotype messenger, and it contains data attributes that are populated from the elements of the input XML file. It contains a serialization, iCustomer, and this essentially has a definition of how to format this class into an XML message. Let's have a look at the receive method. This is the framework method that gets called when an XML message is input. And the very first thing we want to do is to log that input message. So here we have external caller, the instance of our external class. We're calling the log XML method. And here's our parameters. And it's this first parameter that we're interested in. So let's just unpack this a little bit and look at this expression. This represents this manage customer instance as a iCustomer. iCustomer is a serialization that is implemented by the manage customer messenger. And this expression basically says, take this instance and serialize it to an XML message according to the definition of the iCustomer serialization. So the result of this expression is a string, and that string is passed as the value of that first parameter. So let's have a look at another example of calling that external method. The manage customer messenger responds with a different XML message. And let's have a look at that. We'll look into the respond method, which is where that XML message is constructed. Let's have a look at this return statement. This returns an instance of a class called a customer response. And this has a serialization called iCustomer response, which defines how to format that as an XML message. So this expression, a customer response as a iCustomer response, essentially defines a string containing the XML message that comes from the data in that instance. And that's the message that gets returned. Just a couple of lines before that, we have an example of calling our external class method. So here's our instance of our external class. There's the method log XML, and here's our expression for the first parameter, a customer response as a iCustomer response, which resolves to the XML message. So as you can see from this, by defining this initial parameter as a var string,
there's a wide variety of different XML messages, different XML message types that can all be passed via that parameter.
Thanks, Russell. I'll look into it. What's caught my eye right now is the name that I gave my input field. I called it long input, and I'm not really happy with that name anymore. So I'd like to rename it. But that can be a tedious operation. I've got to find all places where I've used this attribute and rename it in logic. But new to AB Suite 8.0 is a rename refactoring dialog where I can type in my new name and it can show me where it's used, and I can just click apply and it's all done automatically for me. What I'd like to do now is pass you over to Fred to explain how to activate this rename refactoring. And also, Fred, I've heard that I can secure my build password. Can you also explain how I can do that? Because I'm eager to build my application with a secured password. So over to you, Fred.
Hi, Grant. Let me introduce you to two new features we've introduced in 8.0. It's the encrypt password and the global rename. The encrypt password will enable you to secure your password, because at the moment on either build scripts from the command line, or if you have a script, we need to, the password is in plain text, which you don't want to share the password around. So what we introduced is the ability to encrypt your password. So that's in the tools options, tool system modeler, encrypt the passwords. And all I have to do is just pretty much just enter my passwords, and it will write the password in the output window. It's also on the clipboard, so I can just now pretty much just copy and paste the encrypted password either in my build script or from the command line. And that's all I have to do to secure my password for building from the command line. There's nothing else required for this feature to secure your password. Hope that will help to secure builds. The second feature is the global rename. By default, this feature is disabled. So the first thing we need to do is to enable that particular feature. It's in tools options on Visual Studio under the text editor. There's the LDL plus, which is all the settings you can set for the editor. And in the advanced section, if you scroll to the bottom, you will see there's an enable symbolic rename. So by default, that's turned off. So to make use of this feature, we have to turn it on. And we press OK. What this will allow is to, when I do a rename from either from the class view, the properties window, or even from the logics, it will rename the attribute and follow through with all the logics as well. So if I just select rename here and I give it a new name, I can do the preview changes. So that will show me the preview where as the cast in its old name is being used, and it shows me a preview of the logics, what the new logic will look like. I have the ability to uncheck one if I say, look, I don't want to rename that one because for whatever reason. In this case, we're just turning it on, and I press apply. And I can see that the logic, all the places have been updated accordingly, and the attribute itself has been renamed as well. This feature does not only apply to attributes, it will also apply to, for example, profiles. I can do a rename here. So I can do a new name. In this case, only using one location, but the preview is the same. So it will show you the updated logics. Yep. And if I go to srep with definition, you can see that the change has been not just the logic, but also the attribute itself or the whatever object it is. You know, so it can be a class, a profile, a method, a profile. And that will enable you to symbolic rename. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. That was really helpful. I've now been able to securely build my application. And here we have our working runtime version of our Sudoku application. There's a board, and there's it solved. And that concludes this presentation. The AB Suite team hope you found this useful and enjoy using AB Suite 8.0 just as much as we do. Goodbye.